security and policy initiatives.
To everyone. I, Sarang Nirkar, co-founder of SAPI, Security and Policy Initiatives, welcome you all to a webinar, a web discussion on a very interesting topic, that is Indocracy, a framework of democratic governance to optimize national security of India. This session is being brought to you with a very eminent speaker, Shri Jitendra Kumar Ojha, who is a geopolitical strategic expert. And today's session will be chaired by a very eminent guest, that is Dr. Ajay Sahni, who is Executive Director of the Institute for Conflict Management. I will now request Shri Jitendra Kumar Ojha to explain the concept of Indocracy to all of us that we are very keen to know. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful to Shri Pradeep Gupta for giving me this opportunity, and Dr. Ajay Sahni, who has been very kind to chair this session. When I abruptly exited government on not a very pleasant note, Dr. Sahni was one person who has been holding my hand, I can say, and advising me on lot many issues. And first published paper I had was in his journal, which he mentioned. Today we are going to discuss some very fundamental issues I'm going to talk about. And that fundamental issues, we have to look at things from the beginning. I will say that 99% human race, we share common genes, and yet we are different, both as individuals, as societies, as communities. This is largely because of different journeys we had. The world, how long it is, we don't know. Until early 19th century, we were meant to believe that we are just 7,000 years old or 6,000 years old. But today we realize we are 6 billion years old. Human race, you said that Homo sapiens, now we are being told that somehow they are 500,000 years old, 500,000 years to 600,000 years. So in all these years, we have been evolving. And so different societies, cultures, civilizations have been evolving. India has also had a remarkable journey. And how old is our journey? We don't know. For a large part of our history is still not known. And whatever history is known, I think will have to be rewritten. I'm not talking about glory. When I talk about Indocracy, I'm not talking about the glory of India. Of course, democratic republicanism was part of India. We had very different contexts because whatever culture, civilization, and ideas we are talking about, these have been constantly evolving. So it is very well known that democratic republicanism was part of our identity. Example of Raja Bharat. Few days back, Dr. Sahni has been mentioning that Rajabhishek was not a kind of privilege which was being given to others. Rajabhishek, or we had some of the earliest tradition of dharma-driven governance. Today, we are able to sustain democracy amidst most adverse circumstances is largely because of our ancient original values. But these values are no longer there in purest form, and it cannot be. We are today partly influenced by Mamluk, Mongol, Turk, Scythians, Hun, Parthians. So when we are talking about present day India, we are talking about a kind of, you can say, a cocktail of so many ideas, values, institutions, and everything. But still, I would say, despite ups and downs that we have had as a civilization, and even as a state, we are very lucky that we are a large country. We are an independent country. I will request Pradeep ji to shift to the second slide. That we are still considered a very promising power. And I believe that world will be very different if India comes up as a major global power, as a major global stakeholder. Because democracy we are talking about, or even some of our ancient humanist values that we are talking about, those values, despite all our strengths, our advantages, if how South Asia or Indians performing, if you see on most parameters of HDI, Human Development Index, if we see on per capita income or physical capacity of in terms of health, etc., we are doing very badly. The entire Indian subcontinent, it accounts for 3.5% of the total surface area. And we account for nearly 1/4 of the mankind. So one thing is very clear. At one point of time, life was amazingly brilliant here, comfortable here. lot of history books also confirm, history books written by foreigners also confirm. But at the same time, those ideals, those ideas, those systems of governance, those systems of security and strategy, Kautilya that we very often quote, all those have been, those could not ensure our security somehow. Somehow we lost direction. So today when we talk about glory of India, I think we have a lot to learn from our lapses and failures, what brought about our downfall and our decline. And this is why we say that every state, every society, every civilization has to constantly think and rethink where it is heading and what it can offer. And when we talk about India, at this point of time, we feel that India has to rediscover itself, reinvent itself, not for itself only, but because of our values of humanism, pacifism, or advancement of knowledge, or integrity, altruism, empathy, that we consider our core values. They are under threat almost everywhere. There's far more de-Indianization of India within India than anywhere else. So let me tell you what is Indocracy. Sarang said that I must explain the concept of Indocracy. Indocracy is not about supremacy of India, or it's also not about going back to past. Of course, Indocracy is inspired by some of our finest ancient civilizational values, but we are talking about a futuristic framework of comprehensive governance, of which national security is an integral part. We are not trying to erode, we are not suggesting anything that erodes whatever was promised, enshrined, or identified as target by Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We are trying to further refine it, which suits our context. Our objective, Indocracy, seeks to foster higher quality of social trust, collaboration, and competition, to push for excellence and innovation, based on eternal principles of justice, fairness, equity, and universal access to security, dignity, and opportunities of life. But if we just say these are our ideals and we don't know how to achieve it, these will remain very hollow words. So we are talking about how to build strong institutions, and not only strong institutions, but a favorable ecosystem. We realize it's not going to be easy, but with strong leadership in every section, I believe a lot more changes are possible. If Vikings could make some of the finest democracies in Scandinavia, and they could advance to such an extent, and if India could degenerate, or some other regions could also come up, let us be very optimistic that if there is good leadership, if there are powerful ideas, if there are powerful initiatives, everything is possible. So with this hope, we are talking about Indocracy. I shall explain Indocracy as the ideal or vision. Of course, it is derived from our ancient texts and scriptures, you can say, but only to a limited extent. When we talk about Indocracy as a vision or form of governance, Indocracy talks about how an individual should relate with outside world, including man, nature, universe, and everything, because everything is interrelated. So Indocracy envisions three interdependent levels of, you can say, mutually empowering equilibrium, or peace, or harmony, or synergy. First is within human beings, our faculties of head and heart and physical existence. There has to be a sustainable synergy among these. Second level, Indocracy as an idea, it seeks to establish mutually empowering equilibrium between individual and community. Individuals' brilliance, innovation, and everything must be harnessed for optimum social good, and society is also obliged to provide ideal conditions for individuals, not individuals at one level I'm talking about. Once we know that even a fetus which is a few weeks old in a mother's womb gets impacted if mother is subjected to a lot of stressful environment. So it's not that we are talking about nutrition, sanitation, and these things. We are also talking about congenial ambience where every individual can optimize fully before coming into this world, even before being born. So that is the kind of mutually empowering equilibrium we are talking about between individual and society. And at third level, I would say equilibrium, similar equilibrium between man and nature. World today is talking about climate peace, climate change, this, etc. But this has been part of our life. But yes, we've forgot it. We have lost direction, and we have to learn lessons from past. Now let me get down to what is national security. What do we understand? Most of us, we use the word in a very narrow sense. We think it is tactical management of conflict. Somehow, how smartly we manage conflict. People who go a little further, so even I used to try build sometime indices of national security. We used to say a sum total of real and potential conflict. And responses a sum total of our institutional capacities to manage these conflicts. I'm not getting into academic discussion, and a lot of papers are there on national security. Those are available on the web. I'm not getting into that. But yes, at one point of time, we used to think, what is the sum total of our institutional capacity to anticipate a threat, contain a threat, or even eradicate it to some extent? And this is impossible. No nation can be absolutely secure, and even in a fragile nation, under certain circumstances, can enjoy a certain degree of security. But this is very dangerous. If we are a large country, a large state, our security is not only for us. Our security impacts security of so many smaller nations. Dr. Sani said that how the world has changed. There's no more superpower. Sole superpower cannot be very hegemonic. China is challenging it. Russia has defied it in certain ways, and we are living in more unstable times. At the very beginning of this month, on 1st of August, UN Secretary General said, world is just one misunderstanding away from nuclear catastrophe. So we are definitely in difficult times. So in these difficult times, I've always maintained that a powerful, strong India can lend a larger stability to global strategic equilibrium. So when I'm talking about national security of India, I'm not being very parochial. I'm not being very aggressively nationalist for India itself. I believe a stronger, democratic, and plural India is very critical for larger stability of the global order and ensure security of entire mankind. So today, a broader school of national security believes that virtually every action, every objective of every state action has to be national security. Constitution, laws, if these are required, these have to be modified. National security in a democracy or otherwise also is not security of ruler alone, which in medieval era we had somehow got confused. National security is about how strong a bond we can build within a society where each individual contributes. If we see in the context of Indocracy that we have discussed, how each individual contributes to security of the nation and how nation itself empowers each individual. This appears brilliant at the level of ideas, but how can we reduce into very concrete structures, processes, practices, and procedures? So I'm talking about national security in this larger sense. We all admit at one level that the most critical unit of national security is human health. Unless and until people are physically and psychologically healthy, their productive capacity will not be very high. And not only physical and psychological health, but cognitive capacity. I will also tell one thing that I have told at many platforms, that many a times we believe that welfare state and national security are incompatible, but that is not the case. In 19th century, when mass warfares were a very common phenomenon in Europe, it is military generals who started pressuring their governments that, look, 40 to 50%, 60%, 70% in many cases, young people who are recruited to serve in armed forces, they were suffering from various kinds of ailments, tuberculosis, physically unfit. They said, with this kind of population, we cannot fight war. Today, when we realize that economic productivity is important, today, when we realize that quality of R&D is very critical for national security, we need healthy population, we need healthy workforce. But healthy itself is not sufficient. Even if people are healthy and good number of them are dancing in Bollywood, I don't know to what extent it serves our purpose. We need proper institutions which impart them with right skills, skills which definitely contribute to collective strength of a nation, composite national power, which West would like to define. I think we have to go beyond that. So to what avenues they are having, and that depends on what structures, processes we are having, what kind of leadership we are having. And this is alone not sufficient. What is our cultural values? How much it fosters trust? How much it fosters collaboration? How much it fosters excellence? All these are important. So when we are talking about national security, we are talking about an entire framework of governance, and not governance at one level. At a large country, we know that instead of being very obedient citizens, we must ask questions also. We must contribute also. We must contribute to build institutions, and not one institution, but an integrated framework of institutions. Dr. Sani just wanted to tell you with this thing, that when I was doing my NDC and you had come to lecture at that point of time also, the paper I wrote was Integrated Institutional Framework of Governance at Bedrock of National Security. So my commitment to national security is not academic. It's definitely straight coming from my heart. My whole life also I devoted to it. And everything that I'm saying, of course, I'm trying to use ideas, but a lot of passion and commitment is also there. So when we are talking about national security, I believe there is absolutely no conflict between welfare state, democracy, and national security, provided we are able to build these institutions. When I'm talking about these institutions, I'm not talking about rules, regulations, laws. I'm talking about unwritten rules. Today, the democracy in West succeeded to a substantial extent was unwritten support was given by their values, the social systems, the traditions, the norms that they had for themselves. Of course, they did not have it for us. They had it for themselves, and we should not expect it from them. So wars or conflicts will be unavoidable, I would say. But to what extent in our normal framework of governance, we can prevent and preempt these conflicts and manage or contain these things without depleting ourselves. In certain cases, certain types of war are of a very high priority. I remember a few years back, I was participating in a discussion at Global Strategy Forum, and there were many people who were telling Great Britain that this was doing a great service, that it was removing all tanks, etc. And some of the generals said that, look, we are an island nation. We no longer require tank. We don't foresee, with NATO and this thing, we don't foresee land wars or tank, etc. may have high nostalgic value, but we have to be prepared for a different kind of this thing. I'm saying in India, of course, we are only country. We are facing covert war also. We are facing, we face a threat of conventional war also. We face a threat of nuclear war also. And many a times I feel no major country in the entire world faces as much and as serious and as complicated threats to security that we are facing. So wars will be fought. Wars will be unavoidable. But the purpose is, for what purpose are we fighting these wars? And this is where I believe the very existence, idea, and ideals of India is important. It is very important that we do not blame others. We do not say, oh, these communities came, others came, and they did harm to us. No, there was something seriously wrong with us. And that's why we were trampled upon by marauding, semi-civilized, barbaric races, or a spice trading company also managed to colonize us. So instead of blaming them, we need to introspect, we need to think. And this is why I'm very honored that we have even a member of parliament and so many other people. And I hope others also see, and all stakeholders of India, they see, and they realize that national security is not for securocrats, not for security experts. Everybody has to be part of it. And if something goes wrong, I think even the elite will be seriously impacted. This is a brief lecture, so I will briefly say, where do we stand as far as national security vulnerabilities are concerned, our strengths are concerned? There is no doubt that we are only country with this size, with this variety, who has done reasonably well. But at three levels, particularly when we are talking about threat and geopolitical level, Dr. Sani mentioned the kind of threat that we are having from China. China in its entire history has never been democratic. It has always believed in deception and clandestine. It was a very small civilization. It has been expanding from there. And in this Asia, as a civilization, as India has been fragmenting and declining, China has been making steady rise and expansion. I'm not saying that all our values are perfect, but this kind of steady expansion of China may benefit some people. But the way the neocolonialism, Dr. Sani was mentioning that how China has perfected a new model of neocolonialism, where it is able to extract resources of most of the resource-rich countries and other countries, including India, and in turn flood us with cheap goods. So what is it doing? It is destroying our capacity. It's not that the entire Chinese population is involved. We have to see what kind of political structure and political system which is operating in China. Chinese have always been super elitists. In the entire history of China, only two commoners could reach position of power. One was Liu Bang, the founder of Han Dynasty, sometime in 1st century AD or so. And second was Mao Zedong. People say even he was son of a chieftain. And someone said, no, Chiang Kai-shek was the other person. We don't know. But China is a super elitist society. And it has defied Western prophecy. Many Western experts, they started saying they made calculation that in 2015, China will become democratic because it would have attained this level of GDP, this level of per capita income. And they have been saying we are democratic because of our association with the West. That was a terrible folly on their part. I can say in next 100 years also, China is not likely to be democratic. Yes, Vikings from Denmark and Sweden and these people, and even who captured England for some time, they could become democratic, but they took a very long time. They took a few centuries. So if China has to be democratic, it will take several centuries. Now let us get down to Pakistan. We know Pakistan, they sometimes try to define their identity as Arab, as Muslim, as Turk, as Mamluks and Mongols, but majority of them are Hindu converts only, opportunists only. We should not say, I don't believe that 1% genetic differences people are having, that shapes their behavior. But Pakistan was created, I say, with all my sense of responsibility, by receding colonial power. It was created as some kind of ailment or a cancerous this thing, which will affect 1/4 of mankind who are aspiring to be democratic. But you see what has happened. Despite getting best piece of land, most fertile land, very favorable land-man ratio, very healthy population, the system of governance that they had, that has virtually doomed them. It's only a matter of time when Pakistan, despite becoming nuclear power with the help of West, where does it go? But all these countries, they pose a very serious threat to us. Pakistan has engaged us in irregular and covert war, and a lot of our energies have been drained by that. Once you are involved in war, whether you win a war or lose a war, if the war prolongs, there are consequences of war. Even if you win a war over a long period of time, there are consequences. I always mention, and if a war is fought, even a covert war is fought on your territory, there are costs. So despite all our resilience of our institutions, very good work done by many people, yes, we have paid a price for that. West today has become very sympathetic to us. But let us be very clear that West's entire concern over rise of China is driven by their concern or commitment of domination of the West over the rest. We have to convince them that you need us as partners. We cannot be this system of West dominating the rest is over. And you need us as partner as much for our security as it is for your security. So we have to be clear about these geopolitical external realities. Let us get down to our internal. We have dysfunctional governance institutions. There is no confusion about that. Today, a democratic country like India, which is supposed to believe in or practice competition and meritocracy some degree of. So how come this system is lagging behind China? How is it that China has posed 4 to 5 or 6 times ahead of us? There must be something seriously wrong. Our democracy is being somewhere, I would say, is being filtered. We have not been able to create optimally good institutions. People say, well, we have brilliant policies, but our implementation capacity is limited. I say, no, sorry, your institutions are perverted. Your institutions are incompetent. It's not that we just somehow provide stability. In a competitive world, we have to see that we have most optimal institutions, and things are wrong with, I would say, the kind of political system. We should not blame politicians as such, because the kind of system that we have, this system cannot be rectified by politicians alone. I think our corporate leaders, our civil society leaders, intellectuals, everybody has to come and see India has to carry out an innovation. We cannot afford to stay on where Western democracy is. So there are problems with political this thing. I wouldn't like to narrate anecdotes, but the biggest threat to rule of law stems from the kind of political system we are having. We are talking about democracy. I mean, no offense to people, but dynastic parties, privately owned parties, etc., this kind of refrain is coming. We have to seriously look at it. And I always say that any reform in political parties is impossible without corresponding reform in corporate sector. So today, we say that fine, privatization offers solution to everything. I would also like to point out that in many areas of fundamental research today, China has forged ahead of United States. In certain key areas, they have focused, especially defense-related, AI or certain highly scientific this thing. Pradeep ji will tell you more. And they have focused and they have forged ahead. Reason is that out of 112 Chinese companies which are in Fortune 500, 109 are PSUs. These PSUs companies, state sector companies, they are able to make much bigger investments in fundamental research, R&D, and they are not worried about profit. And this is where in next 20 to 30 years, it is being expected that despite American accumulated advantages, the strengths of their institutions, knowledge and technologies, in next 20 to 30 years, if Chinese system keeps on in this manner, they will forge ahead of America also. So we have to see where does our corporate sector figure? Are we a country of traders and brokers and deal makers? We have to seriously think over it. We need to be innovators. The objective of this thing is not prosperity alone. And that is why I find that when I'm talking about Indocracy, that our action should not be directed by our self-interest, our need to make profit. It has to be, we have to realize that we are part of a larger entity, and that larger entity impacts us. And that larger entity is not a liability alone. That larger entity has to be an empowering entity. Similarly, civil society, these are all areas. Bureaucracy, we are still, I've always maintained, and this has earned me, I would say, anger and disapproval of even some of my best friends, that we are still having 19th century model of bureaucracy. In this 19th century model of bureaucracy, you paratroop at a certain level, you may be a brilliant person in Pali, Sanskrit, or whatever, you have no exposure, no aptitude to the work which is being given to you, and you keep rising as long as you're enjoying goodwill of your bosses or goodwill of the system, or if you're pliable in certain cases. Democracy survives because of, or this kind of system, because of integrity, autonomy, and a very strategic equilibrium among various institutions. So autonomy of bureaucracy is very important. I will just tell a kind of anecdote. When I was undergoing my foundational course training at Missouri, I happened to interact with Sri Rajeshwar Prasad. He was former director of that academy, and he was private secretary to Lal Bahadur Shastri ji. So he told me in the evening, we happened to meet, and he told me how he had opposed his health minister, Sri Raj Narayan ji, on a certain issue. And situation came to such an extent that Raj Narayan ji threatened to sit on a hunger strike in front of the house of Rajeshwar Prasad ji, who was health secretary. He said, this is the way rule has to go. I'm not saying that that there has to be a confrontation between civil service and political leadership, but we need professional civil service, because leadership has changed. A lot of people say that our civil service is meant to provide leadership. This was brilliant for colonial government. The colonial government has done away with this kind of system, but we need leadership where we select people with right aptitude in a certain area, they specialize in that area, and of course they have wider exposure and they become leaders. And then when they become leaders, we provide conducive environment for them to excel in that area. Today, I wouldn't like to say many other anecdotes about bureaucracy, but yes, this is a problem. And if we don't have a very effective civil service, naturally our policies will appear brilliant on paper, but this will not be visible as much as it should be visible on the ground. I'm not saying everything is bad. Yes, it is our values, our ethos, etc., which are helping us. Despite all shortcoming of the system, we are doing fairly well, but we are capable of doing far more. And this is why 4 areas of concern that I would like to mention. One is massive population, large population, but unhealthy population. 40% of our children, they suffer from stunted growth, impaired cognitive skills, and that is dangerous. If it has been universally seen, all data is there to see that even few years higher in life expectancy results in 60 to 70% total productivity in lifetime of a person. So our population cannot necessarily become an advantage if population is not physically healthy, does not have good cognitive skills, does not have right access to technical skills, and we do not provide them with right values also. If they have to constantly fight with each other, then and there is no rule of law as such, a lot of our energies will be frittered away instead of being harnessed towards enhancing our composite national strength. There is another issue which we have to say, as earlier also I mentioned, that 3.5% of surface area we have and 25% of population. How much pressure it is exerting on our resources, on land, water, and natural resources, which cannot be reproduced. So technically, we should be looking for newer areas. We should be signing agreement, etc., with Russia that give part of Siberia to us, or maybe you should discover a new a new planet itself, where we can transfer some of our people. And we similarly have another Bangladesh, another smaller country, which has very high population density, and they have been constantly migrating to India for a long time. So in entire this South Asia, if we see, this adverse land-man ratio is a cause of great worry. And 2 more issues, though there are many, I would just like to flag. One is extreme inequality in society. Anywhere, if societies become extremely unequal, then all pressures, all instruments of accountability, etc., they get dismantled. And this is happening with our institutions, not now, but for a long time, I would say, at least for the last half a century. This integrity and autonomy of institutions are being impacted in various ways. And these are eliminating strategic balance that we are talking about. And another issue that we have to be careful is societal fissure. That a sense of this thing that these identities are irreconcilable, they have conflicting orientation, that is something very difficult. And this is why I say that none of these problems, whether the problem of poor health of population or problem of poor cognitive skills, this cannot be handled as a standalone problem. We need a kind of, I would say, a mutually empowering equilibrium between state and society. I'll take a small little break and tell an anecdote. When I was studying more than 3.5 decades back, one of my teachers, she was an economist, but at the same time, she was someone very well versed with Indian scriptures and very broad and liberal in outlook. And she compared state and society in male and female listing, that how male and female, they empower Shiva and Shakti concept, which we very often talked about. We talk about. She compared society in a feminine sense. She said that society must grow, evolve. There has to be freedom. In the same way that a man is expected to guard a woman so that woman becomes powerful, evolves, grows, and in return, the woman empowers man. But man has to see that being strong, having wider exposure, see that nobody is able to harm the woman. Similarly, state has to guard and protect society without being oppressive towards society. So I think this concept still resonates in my mind. And when we are talking about rules, etc., we have to see that only malicious freedom in society has to be curbed. Even some of the best kings, even some of the dictators who managed to enhance security of their states and societies, they did in a manner that they respected knowledge. They did not interfere with wisdom. Even sometimes wise people oppose them, they still managed to respect them. And that is what constituted progress. But in certain civilization, our knowledge, as I said, is restricted to a few hundred years, few centuries. So we take most examples from there. But in 600,000 years, a lot of history we don't know. We barely know history of 1,000 and 2,000 years. And that is also the history which has been taught to us. But what I'm trying to say, unless and until you have a vibrant and robust society, healthy population, ethical population that provides good quality of leadership, it's impossible to build those integrated institutions of framework. It's impossible to build the kind of changes that we are talking about. And that is why when we talk about national security, it's not only institutions of governance we have to focus. We also have to focus society. We also have to focus media. We also have to focus at how civil society can become partner in the process of governance. We have to see how private sector can remain robust. It can represent the voice of, I would say, initiative, industry and enterprise. And how that initiative, industry and enterprise is harnessed not for trading benefits, not for profits, not how much big empire they have built, but how much do they contribute to composite strength of a society or civilization called India. Now, I'll briefly touch 2-3 aspects. Dr. Sani was mentioning it, the kind of world that we are living in. I'll mention 2-3 points. Of course, Chinese model of neo-imperialism we have mentioned. But the West is talking about one thing, that constant decline in democracy. Freedom House, in its last report early this year, mentioned that 16 consecutive years democracy has been in decline. But this is not sufficient. We cannot lament that democracy is in decline. We have to see why democracy is in decline. West is refusing to, I would say, appreciate and address some of the inbuilt contradictions which are there in their own economic system or political system. We have seen what happened in January 2021. Sometimes the political competition in most democracies are resulting in irreconcilable squabbles and conflicts. They are causing far more social fissures. I am not saying that political competition has to be eliminated. No, political competition has to be regulated. We need to set newer norms of political competition. As I said, we have to decide who will contest election, at what level somebody will contest election. How can we bring down cost of election? How can we see that most worthy and deserving people get to represent people? When we are talking about that bureaucrats should not stay there for too long, we should also be mindful that no politician should stay at the helm for 40 years or 50 years or 30 years. And nobody should go, no dynast should get into straight away without contributing. Let people come at the grassroots level. Let there be segregation of political system at municipal level. Let there be more focus on those levels. Some of the countries who are doing very well, like Scandinavian democracies, or New Zealand, or for that matter, even Great Britain. Their municipal level bodies, local level bodies are very powerful. They are contributing a lot to education, healthcare, etc. So we have to see how much responsibility can be delegated here in that context. And we borrow a little bit from the West, but then we carry out our own innovation. We have to learn from these, I would say, shortcomings of the West. We have to be grateful to them that, if we compare from medieval era, without Enlightenment era changes, which West was able to bring about, probably this democracy would not have been sustainable. We would not have had this relative phase of 6 or 7 decades that we have had. We have not had whatever system we are having, but I believe that we have to act as partners. Chinese threat is there. Chinese threat cannot be contained by simply aligning with the West. We have to present a model, and in that model, our private sector has to come up as a very active participant to see that we contribute to some kind of partnership. When I'm talking about Indocracy, what other factors that inspires Indocracy? We don't know when this Sun Temple in Cambodia was built, or the Sri Vijaya Kingdom was built. But when India went to these places, it shared its knowledge and wisdom with them. It shared its practices with them. Those practices may have been very advanced and useful at that point of time. But with passage of time, everything changes. I'm not saying that we should replicate history, but we have to think in a way and create a system by which we are able to form more endurable bonds with these people. When we went to these countries also became prosperous. Song and Tang era of Chinese history, these are best phase in their history. They were most prosperous at that point of time, and Buddhism was at peak. So when I'm talking about Buddhism, I'm not talking about identity, but I'm talking about the wisdom that Buddhism carried. Buddhism was, I would say, I think some of the teachings of Buddha were reiterated by Aristotle a couple of centuries later, that excellence does not lie at either end of the extremities. It is somewhere in between, and that in between is not the midpoint necessarily. So what I'm trying to say, in this kind of unstable world, India has to come up with a new model, and that model is something that should inspire hope. It must be driven by our ancient values, but we cannot go back to what was past. And what is that model? I'm not saying that I'm offering a perfect prescriptions, but yes, we have to keep on refining these ideas. I feel that whatever new ideas that we are talking about, there will be resistance to those. But at the end of the day, it will be the quality of leadership we are having. And I feel that we have amazing quality of leadership. If we tell our leaders in different sectors that, look, it impacts each one of us individually and collectively both. Many India's corporate houses have been saying that they will migrate to country A, country B. I believe they don't need to do that. We need to work together and create rule of law. And that rule of law will not be possible by just cosmetic changes in the existing systems. We need to radically restructure most of the institutions at every level. At the end, I would say that strength, please bring the final one, Pradeep ji. Strength and resilience of a state, society, and civilization rests upon its ability to consistently throw up powerful ideas, refine these through practices with sole objective of improving collective plight of its people. Particularly in the context of India, we say that we should not aspire to enhance quality of existence and destiny of our own people. We should rather be concerned towards the bond that we have shared with humanity. Even now, India is more acceptable entity in Africa, Asia, or even South America, or even West, one would like to say. So we have to rediscover those values, but those values remain empty words unless and until we can harness this into concrete and specific strength. And I would just once again reiterate that rise of a plural and democratic India as a major global stakeholder is critical not only for 1.3 billion Indians, but for larger strategic balance of this world, global order, as well as security of entire mankind. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for introducing this very interesting topic, sir.